I think OCD is probably one of the more under diagnosed. If I were to take a wild guess, I'm not sort of basing this off any sort of statistics, but I would guess that it's probably the most unrecognized in the average person, and especially within the spectrum of how it exists. So this episode is not solely dedicated to those of you who struggle with OCD or sort of irrational thoughts and overthinking of that nature, but more in the sense of how can we learn from the sort of strongest measures of OCD and see how many fall on the spectrum and how a lot of overthinking can actually be solved even if you don't fall all the way to the sort of intense side of the spectrum. So let's go over sort of a typical situation that might happen in your life, right? So you're obsessing over a certain fear or anxiety, and without any awareness of sort of mindfulness or how to end a thought cycle, you maybe go on Google, or you do a lot of research, or you read a lot of things on Reddit and watch a lot of different YouTube videos that sort of create a sense of safety from that fear because you're looking for a logical explanation as to why that fear is not true. But of course, what's actually happening is you're engaging in a compulsion. So first comes the obsession and then comes the compulsion. When you do these acts, when you're looking for a logical sort of explanation and sort of reassurance from an imaginary fear that is irrational and doesn't really exist, you're showing your mind that this is a real threat that needs to be sort of brought up to our attention more and more. How we break the thought loop is not only in how we engage with our thoughts, but the first thing we need to do is we need to stop taking actions in pursuit of reassurance from imaginary dangers. And that's the really big thing. There's no safety from a danger that isn't real. And when you search for safety from a danger that isn't real, you're going to not only find a false safety and a temporary safety, because it'll make you feel good for 30 minutes to an hour until a sort of new angle comes up and you're seeking reassurance again, and it creates this sort of loop of obsession that can really start to act as a very destructive force in your life. So the first thing we need to do, I think first and foremost, it's the most actionable, it's the most tangible, is we need to stop taking compulsions. We need to stop searching on Google constantly. We need to stop reading stories constantly, or even now with AI and ChatGPT, we need to stop seeking reassurance of fears that we know aren't real. And we need to start trusting our logic more than our emotional discomfort when we come into contact with any of these fears or anxieties. Now, that is easier said than done. And I think it is probably a bit easier at first to try to stop ourselves from taking the action. But the real difficult part comes in sitting with the not knowingness, right? Because that's what we all struggle with. It's not necessarily the fear. It's more we're afraid of not knowing that the fear won't 100% come true. And that's a scary thing. But in the same way as we don't know that it will come true, we have no reason to in any way believe that it will come true. And this is where the separation also needs to be made, because when we're talking about obsessive thinking and compulsions and things like that, it can be very easy to throw a sort of more logical fear that many people have. You know, it's like someone can say, I fear getting hit by a car when I cross the street. Yeah, no, that's not what we're talking about, right? And I think that's just throwing fuel to an unnecessary fire. We're talking about irrational fears. And if you find yourself sort of trying to distance yourself from this because you think your fears are rational and there's a reason that you have to live your life in avoidance and you think your situation is different, I want you to know that's part of the same paradigm. One of the most sneaky tricks that the brain has to offer is that it creates a sense of your situation is different than the many else's who sort of suffer with the same symptoms that you do. That's what the brain does. It tells you, no, your situation is different. Your fears are actually worthy of being treated like real fears. Your thoughts actually know what's going to happen in the future. You're somehow in a different boat than everyone else. And that is categorically what puts so many people at a disadvantage. Because especially, I'm not going to tell people to seek professional help. That is their choice, right? You have the choice if you want to do that or not. But when you don't do that, what happens is you don't have the sort of practices available to you to understand that the behaviors you're taking and the thoughts you're sort of encountering are experienced by thousands, if not maybe even millions, all over the world. So you're not alone in the things that you're suffering. And I think once you recognize that you're not alone and that your circumstance isn't exactly unique, that we can start to apply the practices that have worked for everyone else. Because if they've worked for other people, they'll work for you as well almost all of the time, especially when it comes to sort of interacting with thoughts and obsessive and compulsion behaviors. It's pretty routine, and in the psychological world, it's oftentimes looked at as pretty by the book. Because the thoughts may vary, the fears and anxieties may vary, but the actual systematic process of what's happening in the brain doesn't really change all too much. There's a certain notification that goes off in your mind, a certain thought that evokes a certain fear, a certain feeling, and out of a pursuit of not wanting to both feel the current present fear and number two, want to deal with the unknowingness of what can happen in the future, we seek reassurance that we don't actually need. And this reassurance is very dangerous. It's like a drug. And you need to stay clear of it at all times, because reassurance from imaginary dangers and obsessing over things that logically you don't have to be obsessing over, the brain starts to condition itself negatively. In the same way, I'm always preaching about how the brain can condition itself positively through certain actions and through certain observer and awareness type interactions with our thoughts. The brain can also condition ourselves negatively. And actually, that's not a bad thing. It actually should offer us hope. Because it's not like some fairy tale that I'm trying to sell you, that the brain only works in a positive manner. It only wants the best for you, blah, blah, blah. No, it's like a system. It's like a computer, and how we go about things and the way we structure our behaviors and the practices we do, it's going to condition the mind. So we're either conditioning ourselves positively or negatively, and taking reassurance and sort of trying to get reassurance out of those imaginary fears that you have is conditioning your mind negatively to keep sort of being intoxicated by that reassurance. Because first the reassurance holds you over for a day, then the next day the reassurance only holds you over for a couple hours. The next thing you know, you're compulsively Googling symptoms or whatever the case may be every 30 minutes. So the key is not to, of course, partake in these behaviors. That's the groundwork. If we can do that, that is we can put a check mark next to our day. If we avoid taking those compulsive behaviors that seek reassurance, we can put a check mark next to the first sort of accomplishment of the day. And number two is we have to be willing to sit with that discomfort. That fear that you feel, that anxiety that you feel, you have to be willing to feel it. And it comes hand in hand with the unknowingness of the future, right? So when you feel that fear, when those thoughts come up, the ones that are BS, but somehow they still evoke you into taking these avoidant and compulsive behaviors, we need to not partake in those behaviors, not do those actions, and we need to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. We can admit it. We don't know what's going to happen. Right now, it feels like shit. We're scared. We're living in fear. We're existing in anxiety, but we're going to sit with it. We're not going to take behaviors that show our mind that this threat is real, because the longer we can sit with it and accept that we don't know, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because I know to your logical mind, everything in you just wants someone to come down from the sky and tell you, you can breathe easily, you can live your life. This thing that you're obsessively fearful about is not going to happen. I know we want that, but that's not going to be the case. It's not going to be the case. The certain bravery, resilience, and sort of ableness to sit with fear and discomfort, that is sort of a prerequisite in life, right? And not everyone deals with certain fears and anxieties and whatnot. But if you do, like many others, you do have to have a tolerance to the discomfort and fear of not knowing. We don't know, and that's the price of living life. And it may feel very intense right now, but remember, you can even write this down if you want. The feeling is temporary. It will pass. Just sit with it. Sit with the not knowingness. Sit with the fact that tomorrow, the very thing that you think can ruin your life, you don't know for sure it's not going to happen. Logically, you know it's probably most likely and pretty much not going to happen, of course. But even me saying that, don't get reassurance out of me saying that. Don't seek reassurance. Don't seek to know what tomorrow will hold. Don't treat the fear as if it's something actionable that we need to do in order to prevent it from happening. Why would you prevent something from happening that wasn't going to happen in the first place? You see how this creates a sort of chaotic psychological atmosphere in our minds? How is our brain supposed to calibrate and react to what's going on? All our brain is doing is sending us the very thing we keep interacting with. We keep interacting with this thought. We keep taking behaviors. We keep doing Google searches. We keep going on Reddit. We keep talking to ChatGPT, whatever compulsive behaviors we're partaking in. We keep doing this, and we expect our brain to just let go of the topic. It just doesn't work like that. And escaping this sort of rabbit hole of thoughts and running in circles and ruminating and obsession, it's going to come with understanding that it's not anything to do with specifics. So if you fear planes, it doesn't have to do with planes. It has to do with fear. Because if you don't treat the root problem, which is your inability to sit with discomfort and fear and accept the unknowingness of life, you are going to unfortunately continue to suffer. And we need to understand that we haven't been dealt necessarily a bad hand mentally, but this craziness that we're experiencing in these obsessive behaviors, I would actually argue that they allow you to be invited into a place of deeper awareness. Because if someone didn't have these crazy thoughts to deal with, if someone didn't have these imaginary fears to deal with, they may have never experienced the depth of awareness that is needed to detach from thoughts. They may have never experienced the bliss of mindfulness from realizing that our thoughts are not us and that we can just live our lives living in the present, being the awareness and observant force that exists and animates the body. I often say, and people don't like this, I say ignore your thoughts. And the only reason I say that is to sort of attack the root issue, which is attachment to thought. And of course, observing your thoughts, it means the same thing, saying observing. You're gonna hear the thought anyway. But if you get caught up in observing it and looking at it and hearing it, just leave it alone. Thoughts, thoughts are a trip into what's not happening. Thoughts are the goo and the sort of static of the mind. The real you is the presence within the body. You are more suited and you are better represented as a sort of aware consciousness force by just moving your arm. That is a better representation of your identity than your thoughts, because at least you have control over moving your arm. And you can say, oh yeah, sometimes I have control over my thoughts. That's just you engaging in a mental behavior and sort of finding good representation in words and language, right? Those aren't the thoughts we're talking about. And honestly, I would go as far as to say we don't even really have to categorize that in the same thing. Thoughts that you choose to think. For example, you're hungry and you begin and you make the conscious choice to think about your food options that are near you, that you can walk to or whatever the case may be. That's a completely different ball game than receiving a random fearful thought out of nowhere. Completely different. Completely different. And I don't think either are a valid representation of who we are. I do believe we are the awareness, we are the observer, we are the listener of the thoughts. But if someone must and wishes to make that argument, it can be entertained. So, obsessive compulsion disorder, I think it exists in a wide spectrum. I think it's under talked about, especially in the younger generation, because social media is making everything happen so quick. You can see, you know, if you have a fear, an obsessive fear, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 triggers in a matter of a minute, right? And then there's going to be a part of you that engages with that content of your fears on social media. And of course, what does social media do? It's going to feed you more of that. So if you're afraid of planes, there's a weird psychological thing that happens that you might want to watch videos of planes going through turbulence, or, you know, all the things that can go wrong in a plane or something like that. It's not because you enjoy seeing it. It's not because you're trying to feed your fears. It's mostly unconscious what's happening. It's because fear is addictive in a way. And in a very weird and strange way, we're almost validating our fears by watching content of it. So when social media comes into the mix and you're dealing with obsessive thinking and irrational fears in relation with social media, you need to be hyper aware. You need to be hyper aware and make sure that any content that associates with your sort of fears, I would just click disinterested. And then, later on, when you think you're making real progress and you're experiencing real growth, I think then we could do something really interesting, is that we can see, for example, a video of planes on our social media page, and we don't engage with it or avoid it, but we just see it and we just keep scrolling. We don't allow it to even have any effect on our lives. It's as if the part of us and the version of us that was constricted and obsessively fearful of that thing has passed. There is no longer anything in our mind that holds the belief that for some reason this particular fear is more relevant to our life and has a higher possibility of occurring directly to us. The whole framework is obviously completely ridiculous when you're thinking about irrational fears. And that's the problem. You're trying to, a lot of times, fight obsessive and irrational fears with logic, but logic isn't going to solve that issue. Because how do you approach with logic? You approach with logical thoughts. You're battling thoughts with thoughts, and you're giving energy to the fears, and you're just fueling the obsessive cycle. Don't seek reassurance. That temporary safety will not free you. The only thing that will free you is not engaging in compulsive behaviors, not allowing yourself to obsessively Google search and look at stories on the internet of your fears or watch videos on social media, whatever it is, and being able to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. Because what's going to happen is, when you're sitting with the discomfort of not knowing, your brain is going to try to convince you that if you don't get reassurance, that for some reason this thing is going to happen. But you have to allow your brain to express that. Allow those thoughts to express the fear and the belief that that thing will happen, because logically, deep within you, you know it's not. And the way to prove to your mind that you're not scared of something imaginary that isn't going to happen is to just sit and not react. That's the most efficient and best way we can go about it. And I hope all of you who are dealing with thoughts that are irrational and obsessive thought loops can benefit from this episode and recognize deeply that our behaviors are so powerful, and that's how we most efficiently communicate with our brain, is through behaviors. If you guys are also interested, I do have 2 books that touch on the topic. You guys can check that out on Amazon. Just type in Kinzer MB, or you can visit my website. It's in my Instagram, TikTok bio, everything. And I do have a new book coming out. This is my first sort of announcing of it. It's going to be called Stop Abusing Your Self-Awareness. It's going to be my largest book, my largest collection of writings. It's probably going to come out later this month or maybe earlier next month. And I'm really excited about that. I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. And it's probably my most complete guide to transforming the self yet. So I look forward to you guys reading that. And It's been a pleasure. And let me know if you guys want sort of longer form episodes like this, or if you guys want me to split them more into 10-minute episodes. I'm really going to start leaning into the Q&A style because I think you guys enjoyed that. The Q&A longer episodes, and as well try to start getting guests on. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys want to see, and I'll be paying attention. I'll be listening. And as always, I'll see you guys later.